Welcome in, everyone. It is your friendly neighborhood president's guy. Obviously, by the title of the stream, we're going to be talking about the impact of ICE raids on not the 2026 midterms, as I think those are kind of collectively already going to the Democrats, but what effect they're going to have on the next presidential election, and will it be an easy, layup for whoever the Democratic candidate is. And we've got a few different polls and some data that we're going to be taking a look at to kind of give us an indication of how that's going to go. And these polls are going to be amongst independents. They're going to be amongst Republicans. They're going to be from some conservative super PACs that give us a more accurate information. Because obviously, if a CNN poll, an MSNBC poll, or NPR or whatever say something does not look good for the Republicans, you would expect that. So this just gives us a more objective opinion, so to speak. So we'll just give a couple minutes for people to get in here, and then we'll kind of start going over this data and see what we think in regards to that. And the first thing we're going to look at, a Fox News poll came out, and this one's based on the midterms, but I think it'll be a good extrapolation for where the presidential election in 28 is going to go. First off, it's showing that Trump's starting off with a net approval of 44%, which some polls show him a little lower than that, but either way, that's pretty bad. But the main thing we're looking at here is ICE and immigration, but this gives us a good starting point to say that kind of in a generic ballot situation, 52% of voters in this Fox poll say that they would back a Democratic candidate in their House district, 46% saying that they would vote for a Republican. And that's a 6-point advantage they have there, which is pretty significant. And I believe it was Reuters the other day that came out with a poll that was kind of just um, their generic polling ballot, and it's showing about a 6-point lead. And what's interesting is that's been going on for several weeks now. If you go back into late 2025, I think even back around Thanksgiving, there's been a 6+ nationwide lead for Democrats in the generic ballot. But the main thing we're looking at is amongst ICE. Another just a little generic piece of information to look at is kind of how he's doing with independents. And independents are, they're basically the swing voters. They're the ones that might vote for Obama and then for Trump and then for Biden and then for Trump again. So their opinion really matters, because oftentimes in these contentious districts, especially now where things are more partisan than they've been in a long time, especially with all the redistricting, the independents, the libertarians, the third party voters, they're the ones you really need to be looking at. And Trump has hit his lowest number literally ever. 39% approval, 57% disapproval. With independents, his approval rating is 27% and a 67% disapproval. And this is the lowest he's ever been in terms of independence. And obviously, he's not going to be running again, but it's pretty well established at this point. If it's not his vice president, his secretary of state, or someone like Ron DeSantis, are going to have to either go against the MAGA grain, which is probably not what they're going to do, or go with it. And if it's not doing well, then they're going to be in a lot of trouble. So when you start losing independence is when you're really bad. I mean, a net negative of 40, that is just an abysmal performance with independent voters. And that's going to be, the difference between Michigan going to the Democrats, the Republicans, or Pennsylvania, or Nevada, or Arizona, or North Carolina, or Georgia. These are the voters that make the difference. Now, the important data we're looking at here is Republicans are losing on the border issue. People in general are pretty favorable in terms of Trump's handling of the border, but when it comes to the ICE stuff, they are underwater. 58% of people in this poll say that, and I believe, this is the Reuters poll. Actually, no, this one is this is the what's it called? the Senate Majority PAC, SMP, I believe. 54% saying that they blame Republicans and Trump if there would be a shutdown, which we're actually currently in right now, since there won't be a vote on this round of spending bills until Monday. They disapprove of ICE. I believe it's about 58% disapproval. They want ICE to kind of be reined in, is the language they use here in this piece. And obviously, Trump is kind of starting to do that, at least on paper anyway, bringing them out of Minneapolis. Courts are telling them to disengage with lethal force. But we're still seeing memos that say they can go into people's homes without search warrants. They can arrest people without warrants. And basically all these violations of, First, Fourth Amendment rights, 10th Amendment rights, violating the sanctity of the states, just all these different things. But when you're seeing the numbers this bad, this far out in advance, they're only likely going to get worse. Presidents tend, unless you have some just catastrophic event like 9/11, presidents tend to only get less popular as time goes on, and their party is going to be a reflection of that. So they're already going to get destroyed in the midterms. 2028 is going to be a shoo-in for whoever the Democratic candidate is. And then when it gets even further than that, in terms of just straight getting rid of ICE, you've got 46% of people that are at least entertaining the idea of getting rid of ICE entirely. And that's more than likely almost entirely Democrats, because you can see here 76% of self-identified Democrats say that, but even upwards of 20% of Republicans, which you're probably going to make up a lot of that 41% of the no's as the 73. I mean, it's almost pretty much a mirror on the two parties in terms of how they feel about ICE. But here's what I would really stress to anyone watching is the internet is a loud, vocal minority. And sometimes it's hundreds of thousands of people on Twitter, Facebook, whatever. But they don't reflect the average person. And even sometimes these polls don't necessarily. That's why I like to reference this one where it's the internal, Republican poll, because that one gives you an even more accurate representation of where things are sitting. So obviously, if you looked at the thumbnail, I don't know that I necessarily think that every swing state will go to the Democrat in the next election, but it's a little harder to tell because the numbers now are far worse around than Trump was at this point in his first term. But without COVID, he probably would have won re-election, which is crazy to think about given how bad his first term was. But this one's even worse. People are even less, or even less pleased with the job he's doing. They're more upset. They disapprove harder. And again, it's just, how's it all going to play out? And some of that is going to determine who the candidate is. Whether it's Josh Shapiro, it's Pete Buttigieg, it's Gavin Newsom, Wes Moore, Raphael Warnock. That's sort of the big question. But with a 6% lead in the generic ballot, and considering that I think just about every swing state in 2024 went by less than 6%, most of them less than 3%, even factoring in a margin of error, it's hard to see a path to 270 for Republicans in 2028. And I mean, the math just doesn't lie. And and now you're seeing Minnesota's deploying the National Guard, and Tim Walz is saying things like, is this going to be a Fort Sumter type incident? Which is interesting because the people who would normally be on the side of pro-Confederate, neo-Confederate, they tend to be modern Republicans. And it's quite the irony to see that group of people making those kinds of comparisons. But while Democrats historically in the last almost 100 years have not been the states' rights party, it's still a fundamental part of the Constitution. Now, obviously, Trump, as the commander-in-chief, has the authority to deploy federal agents wherever they want, and he has, at least thus far, not co-opted the National Guard in Minnesota. But you're seeing stories from people on the ground saying that, yeah, when the National Guard rolls up, ICE backs down. Today, there are reports that police officers are intervening, on city and county level police intervening with ICE. And the question just becomes, what's going to be the catalyst for the next big step. Let's see. ICE is in a lot of states, but the only ones that protest have gone wrong are in the blue states where Democrat leaders are edging on the tension. ICE is definitely in a lot of states. That's certainly true. I mean, they're here in Georgia. You know, they've showed up at you know, my wife's place of business, looking for different people. So I mean, they're certainly everywhere. But the number I believe, because Minnesota is 23rd out of 50 states in terms of the amount of illegal immigration, or the population of illegal immigrants in the state. I believe it's like 140,000 people. But yet 13% of ICE's resources are dedicated to that state, and it doesn't. It's not hard to see why. You're obviously not going to see protests where people aren't being killed. In Minnesota, there have been 2 people killed, and if your whole argument is you're going in there to stop violent offenders from killing people, and then the state is killing people, you're going to see, you know, some things. Now, I'm not going to pretend that all the blue states have been cooperative with, you know, immigration's custom enforcement, and they have certainly found people that should have been turned over and deported. But it's a matter of degree, right? You're sending in tens of thousands of people and causing all this mayhem to get 400 people, less than 10 of which are violent offenders, which should be removed. But it's an overly dramatic response to the problem, and one that is costing taxpayers way more than they're getting out of it, because immigrants just are not a burden on the tax system. They're just not. So when you're doing all this and causing all this chaos and all this disruption, you know, I mean, because frankly, if you want to get all the illegal immigrants, you should be in the southern states, you know, in the Southwest, California, New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, you know, just the southern states. Really, if you want to catch the immigrants. Not that many people who come here are going to fly or drive or whatever to a northern state. Some of them certainly will, but not that many. And most of the ones people are finding, you know, that ICE is able to track are ones that came here with some legal type of status, whether it's a visa or something, and they just overstay it, or, you know, they didn't leave when they were supposed to. That's not what most people voted for, frankly. If you ask the average, you know, Republican voter, they're, in their mind, they're thinking, you know, people hopping the border, right? That's the kind of thing they're thinking of in terms of those are the people they want to deport. They're thinking about gang members. They're thinking about people who are walking around with machetes and cocaine in their pocket. My question to you is, would you consider the American people / population to start calling Trump dictator Trump instead of President Trump, because what is he doing right now? I guess that mean I would ask what you mean there, and would he want them to do that, or should they do it based on how he's acting, and would it be like what's the word I'm looking for, like a sarcastic thing? He's definitely expanding executive power to a place we haven't seen it in quite some time, maybe not ever. Tons of executive overreach. I mean, you don't get to write an executive order that flies in the face of the Constitution, right? You don't get to do that. His birthright citizenship executive order, even with this Supreme Court, it's not going to fly, because the language is very clear. If you're born in the U.S., you're a citizen. Is he trying to be a dictator? I don't know. Just because he often will back down on stuff, right? And you would think in his second term of all time, you know, this would be the time where he wouldn't do that, because he has no more elections to win. Hold on 1 second, phone call. All right, guys, give me 1 second. I gotta go tend to the infant. A 1,000 pardons. You know, the night that I stream is the night that the children want to act up, but the other night, or last night actually, I sleep for hours straight. But all right, let's catch up with the chat. If the blue state leaders would follow the law, there would not be all the chaos. The law is a law and illegal for leadership to say they're not following the law, which is causing the chaos. I would say yes and no to that. Things are not as black and white as that statement would indicate. And here's what I mean by that. Yes, there are Democratic states that over the last 10, 15 years, even when Obama was president, did not cooperate fully with immigration law. That's certainly the case. But there are things the Trump administration is doing that courts are, even just yesterday, ruling that some of the, I believe there's some six figures, hundreds of thousands of people that we hear under asylum status from Venezuela, that the Trump administration revoked, and the court ruled that they didn't have the ability to do that. And the reason that that's important is if you're going to flip-flop your system every few years, you're just causing more chaos. So if there are people here that the Biden administration allowed people in using the law that existed because they didn't pass any immigration law, so anything they did was within the president's jurisprudence to do, then it's not illegal. And you can't just declare them illegal and say, all right, you got to go. So it's not always that simple. But yes, there is some degree to that of them not cooperating. But again, the response is still too heavy-handed. The reason I say calling Trump a dictator is because of how he's handling the whole ICE situation. And then you have him out with Greenland situation, all wanting to take over country over oil. Yeah. What I would say with the Greenland and the Venezuela thing, that's not dictatorial. That's just imperialist. And while it's bad, and I disagree with it, one, Maduro was not good for Venezuela. But Trump doesn't care about that. His argument is, you know, they're sending drugs to America. They're not. I mean, do drugs come out of Venezuela? Sure. But do a significant portion of the drugs that enter this country come out of Venezuela? No, they're coming from Honduras. They're coming from Colombia. They're coming from Mexico. They're not coming from Venezuela. And the whole pretext of Venezuela of getting the oil, the problem with that is the infrastructure there is not good. And the oil companies have already said they don't want to foot the bill. So if Trump is going to do that, he's going to have to spend $100 billion to get the oil out, which again is just going to cost the taxpayers money. Now, the Greenland thing, I think it's just another example of Trump trying to distract, because he's basically already said, I'm not going to send troops. He's not going to start killing Europeans to get Greenland, and they're not going to give us Greenland. I think he legitimately just does not know the difference between Greenland and Iceland, which is kind of the whole point of them being named what they're named. They're meant to be deterrents. And it's hilarious that it's still working. TLDR News is a great channel for international news. They talked about that. But it's no, I just think he's like that scene in The Dark Knight where the Joker's like, do I look like a guy with a plan? I'm just a dog chasing cars. I wouldn't know what to do with one if I actually caught it. I don't think Trump genuinely cares about anything, really. He's just kind of evil, just kind of doing stuff just to be a dick, really, and to collect money. He's already made like $2 billion using the presidency since he's been in it. And I just don't have the time or the patience to hear people complain about law and order and this, that, and the other when they were like, oh, Hunter Biden used his position as the vice president's son to do things that he probably actually didn't do. But then they don't care about Trump selling phones and visas for $5 million and this, that, and the third. It's just, he's selling the laws to the highest bidder. He's selling pardons left and right. He's issued more individual pardons than any president. It's definitely against the law to be here without permission. But a lot of these people, so here's what I would say. There was a report from the New York Times about a week or two ago. It was comparing the deportation numbers from Trump's first and second terms. In terms of just overall deportations, they're down. Because at the end of 2024, they tapered off after Biden issued that executive order that he said he could not issue, which was a big reason that Harris lost. But crossings fell off a cliff. Now, internal deportations, not involving border crossings, are up, but not that much. You know, it's up 100 or 200,000 year on year from Biden's last year, and higher than anything Trump did in the first place. But if you were given an asylum case during the Biden administration and told, here's your date, show up for this court date, and we're going to say you can stay on this side of the border, then you're here with permission. You don't have full status as a citizen, obviously, and your ability to interact inside the country may be limited, but you're given permission. No one is suggesting that if you hopped the border, or you overstayed a visa, or an asylum case was ruled against your favor, then you've got to go. I think most rational, sane people would say that's the case. I mean, during Obama's term, he was called the deporter in chief for deporting so many people. He deported like 7 million people in his 8 years. Deported more people in any year than Trump has ever deported in any year of his. It's just the fact that he didn't do it by being an asshole is really the point. It was, we know where you are, we're going to deport you. And there were some states, even back then, because I believe one of the people that just got in Minnesota was, there have been an order for them to, be deported since 2014, which would have been during the Obama administration. So again, it's not just black and white. No one is suggesting that you just have unfiltered illegal immigration into the country, although that's kind of how this country came to be, in a sense. But what does everyone think? How does everyone think, in a just serious, unbiased opinion, how the 2028 election is going to go? I cannot see any universe where JD Vance or Marco Rubio or Ron DeSantis or anyone as a Republican is going to win the presidential election. The midterms are already going to be an abysmal showing for the GOP. They already have razor-thin margins in the House, razor-thin margins in the Senate. If they maintain the Senate, they're going to be squeaking by. Alaska, Peltola is leading in the polls there, which is a bad omen. When Alaska and Texas are at best tilt red, that is bad. That's bad. And, we're going to have one North Carolina seat. There's no such thing as respectful law. That's not true, Nat. That's just objectively not true. The Constitution makes a point to say that you cannot force, police and soldiers to be housed in someone's home, that you cannot enter someone's home without a search warrant, that we don't have cruel and unusual punishment. We have due process. When you have ICE agents running around telling people to their face, if you raise your voice, I will erase your voice. When you have ICE agents running around saying, all right, you're protesting, you're recording us, we're going to put you in this database for revenge purposes. That's not good, and they're covering their faces. They're not having any kind of identifying marks on them. It's not to protect themselves. It's so they don't go to jail. What's going to be curious to me is going to be all the state level charges that get levied against these people, probably starting in the next year or two, because Trump can't pardon them for that. Any federal offenses that, if they were to be brought up, he would just pardon them anyway. But that's what separates the United States from every other developed nation, is, at least on paper, we have laws and we are to enforce them respectfully. How many times do people get arrested and charges get thrown out because police did not dot their I's and cross their T's? They were abusive. They didn't properly explain things to people. They collected evidence in a way that was not legal. They entered your house without a warrant. And then it doesn't matter what you did, because now they're violating procedure. And now they're just going to toss you out. Or they're going to toss your case out against you. So there is certainly respectful law, at least on paper anyway. Doesn't always work out, the way you would want it to, but on paper, that's the way it's supposed to be. But frankly, in just terms of raw numbers, I probably would expect a similar electoral count than we've seen for the last 3 elections. Around 300 is going to be about what any winner gets, whether it's 300 or 302 or 306. I think some of the early data indicates that in the next census states, red states are going to start picking up more representatives, and blue states are going to be losing them. I think California is probably going to lose another 2 or 3 seats. They went from I think they're at 55 or 52 right now, and they're probably going to go down to 50. So that shift is going to be interesting to see if it plays out the way it is right now. But it is going to be curious to see, because typically the historic trend after any given president executes a lot of executive authority or kind of expands the powers of the presidency, you tend to see a shrinking of the powers. You saw this after Wilson's administration. You saw this after FDR. And it's going to be interesting to see whether whoever the Democratic president is, are they going to sign any law into action that reduces the power of the presidency? And depending on how a lot of these Supreme Court cases are going to play out, it seems like the Supreme Court is poised to rule against Trump in terms of the tariff authority, which is going to be a big, tool that the president historically has had. And it's going to be interesting if they, in the process of doing that, limit the ability for them to declare national emergencies. However Trump's presidency ends, how do you think 50 to 100 years from now he will be remembered? I think he will be remembered easily the worst president our country has ever had, and it's not even close. I would not disagree with that. My criteria for judging a presidency are their domestic policy, their foreign policy, their communication, their character, because ultimately the president should be a role model, and their lasting impact. And Trump's lasting impact from a social perspective, while he was not the cause of a lot of this, a lot of that started kind of during Obama's second term. He's definitely exacerbated it. His domestic policies are abysmal. His foreign policies are generally pretty bad. I actually was not that opposed to the bombing of Iran. Maduro, while I don't like the way he was removed, it was not a bad thing that he was removed. But the tariff stuff is terrible, and he's just hateful for the sake of being hateful. Like it's one thing to have a policy, to have a thought, but when you just every unfiltered thought you have, it's thrown into the ether. The president should be the moral and the thought leader of the country, so it justifies and it empowers people to think and act a certain way that they might otherwise not have. So yeah, I would easily say he's going to be the worst president of all time. And if you were to judge his separate terms, I would have put 45. I probably would have put him in the bottom 5 to 10. Trump 47, worst of all time, and it's not even close, like you said. There's just no redeeming qualities from his presidency. And like 90% of the good stuff was someone else's victory. Obama will be the worst president in my lifetime, and I'm a 70s baby. I assume that means you were born in the 70s. Obama is objectively not. Obamacare, while its launch was bad, it has helped 20 million people get insurance. It stops people from being kicked off from having pre-existing conditions. It's just the Recovery Act, while it was a little more crony capitalism than I would have liked, the economy was revived. He saved the auto industry and made them pay back the loans. He was a decent man. He had no scandals in terms of his behavior. When the worst thing you can throw at a guy is that he wore a tan suit, no, it's just objectively not true. Obama, I think he's ranked too high by presidential historians. I think at one point I saw him in the top 10 or maybe around 11. I probably would put him in the teens, maybe low 20s, but no, not worst president. If we're just starting, let's just start 1970. Nixon's worse. I would not say Ford was worse per se. Reagan was worse. W. Bush was worse. And Trump was worse. H.W. Bush, I think, was a solid president. But also, it is too soon to judge modern presidencies. Like, we're just now at a point where we can kind of objectively start looking at Bush's term and Obama's term and kind of see what the lasting impacts of their policies would be. Bush's were pretty bad. No Child Left Behind was bad. The Postal Service Reform Act was bad. Obviously, the two wars were bad. The Patriot Act was bad. The modern surveillance state in the United States as we know it began under Bush, and I talked about this in my ranking stream from 2 or 3 weeks ago. But no, Obama by no stretch of the imagination is the worst president ever. And I will remember I was in the 6th grade when he was inaugurated. I remember watching an English class. And I lived through his presidency, and living in the South, you generally hear unfavorable things. I remember when people went to vote, my friend's grandparents and his mom were McCain supporters, and we were like going to a restaurant or something. They were talking in the front seat about how if Obama gets elected, it's going to be the end of the world and we're all going to lose our jobs. And that narrative was out there because right-wing outlets were pushing the recession that was already going into effect and they knew was going to get worse, and were just preemptively levying the blame on him, which obviously is asinine. I don't know why I keep getting like drop frames. I'm literally 4 feet from my internet extender down here. Interesting. Typically when I use the streaming software, it seems like it doesn't work out quite as well, but I like to be able to share my screen. You threatened to refund my countries that didn't make laws for homosexuals? You're going to have to explain that one to me. If we're going to start saying Obama was a leftist that was in favor of gay marriage from the start, no. He very vocally in 2008 was saying that, no, I'm not in favor of gay marriage. Fulton County, Georgia is going to open up a can of worms in so many states. No, it's not. Not with anyone with a brain. So let me go and break this down to you, because I'm from Georgia. I live here, and I live in the metro area. I don't live in Fulton County. I live outside. I live 1 county outside of Fulton County. I could be in Fulton County in 20 minutes. It's the same thing that happened in Michigan. When you have the most populated county, which Fulton and DeKalb, where Atlanta is the most populated county, it's going to take longer to count votes than some place like Jeff Davis County that has 1,000 people. People want to talk about, they see suitcases of things going into the ballot office. One, if you're going to steal an election, you probably don't have to actually submit 100,000 fake ballots. And you wouldn't do it in broad daylight. So that's nonsense. Not to mention that in 2020, the votes were hand counted 3 separate times. There are also 50 court cases, including judges that were appointed by Donald Trump. And not a single shred of evidence was found. There were two cases of voter fraud in the 2020 election. Now, why is it that the same governor and secretary of state that we had in 2020, Brian Kemp and Brad Raffensperger, who are still the secretary of state and the governor now, if they were going to steal the election in 2020 to keep Trump out, which why would they do if they're Republicans? Why would they not then do it again now? There is nothing there. It is a nothing burger. Blah, 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 blah. The law is scary. There's no... What law? What are you talking about? There's literally nothing. Literally nothing. How about Biden? Where would you put him even though he has only been out of office for a year? Put him B to A just for the fact that he got rid of Trump for a term and did some good things. I think in my ranking I gave Biden a B. Presidential historians put him at about 14. I would not necessarily disagree with that placement. Dominion headquarters is in Venezuela. That's our voting software. That's voting software for some states. This is one problem with America is every state does it differently. I think there are still some states that do paper ballots. The Constitution leaves it up to each state to determine how they do their elections. And like we saw in 2000 with the little punch ballots, there's a million different ways to do it. Here, we use computers and stuff in Georgia, but I always do a paper ballot. I mail in my vote. I always do it paper, and you can track your ballot in Georgia. So you can see which county and jurisdiction you're in, and you can track your ballot that says that you received it, you sent it in, it was accepted, and you can see, who you voted for. So you can verify that your vote was casted for who you want it to be casted for, which is another system to prove, because there are not 100,000 people in the state lining up at the governor's office to say my vote says I voted for someone I didn't vote for. It just did not happen. He forced countries, especially African countries, to adopt homosexual laws, or he would cut off aid. I'd have to look into that. I sincerely doubt that that's the case. An election worker admitted on the record who worked in Atlanta. No, what they said was there were a few 100,000 ballots that didn't have some clerical signature. That's just that's a clerical error. But let's just say, for example, you are a master manipulator, sir. I just live in the real world. If you don't like it, you don't have to be here, dude. I just live in the real world. I get just as mad at people that say Elon stole the election in Pennsylvania for Trump, because he didn't do that either. Or people that suggest that Trump faked the shooting in Pennsylvania. That didn't either. That was not fake either. So it's not just a one side. I am very, very openly liberal. I have no shame, and I make no bones about hiding that. But reality is reality. Trump did get shot in the ear. People died that day. He won the last election, just like he lost the election in 2020. Just a fact of life. But again, let's just say, for sake of example, that the election in Georgia was stolen. Let's just say that it was. And you flop those 16 electoral votes. Biden still wins. And to suggest that every state where Trump lost was because it was stolen is nonsense. You had people in Georgia that were screaming, "Stop the vote. Stop counting votes." And you had people in Arizona that were screaming, "Count the votes. Count the votes." It's just bullshit. Trump lost the 2020 election. It's just a fact of life. And then you get into the constitutionality of, well, if he won it, then he was elected, and then he couldn't run again. Anyone who legitimately thinks that this is going to lead to anything about anything being overturned, or Biden's term being reversed, or any laws or pardons, anything, that is not going to happen. It would go to the Supreme Court. They would say, no, this is nonsense. We're not going to upend the entire country over something that didn't happen. There were endless court cases. And you can go back and watch them. Trump's lawyers would come to court and say, here is a sworn affidavit from someone, that they would investigate and say, oh, well, yeah, then they changed their mind. Or they would say, well, people are saying this, and then provide no evidence. Not when every single city that used the same method Fulton County did flip to. Again, correlation is not causation. Now, again, if there was something that went on, then by all means look into it. But you're litigating a nothing burger, because Trump's the president now. He's getting his 4 years. So he won either way. And this way almost is kind of cooler, because he then staged the greatest comeback in political history. Israel sent Trump a message when they shot him in the ear, and honestly, Trump has been different ever since. I don't know about all that now. Now here's what I would say. 2016 Trump and 2016 to 2020 Trump is definitely different in the sense that, yeah, he's just a doddering old man now. 2016 Trump, even though he was like, 72, that dude had energy. That dude was like 45 in terms of energy. That guy could not be stopped. Trump now, it's just like Biden. The older you get, the slower you get. He's sleepy now. He's bruising. His ankles are swollen. He's probably had a heart attack or a stroke. And you would think that if you get shot or someone tries to kill you and they almost succeed, that it would probably alter your behavior a little bit. Now, I really don't think it has. Trump is still the same bashful guy he's always been. Trump is the modern day Jimmy Carter as president. People in the 70s hated on Carter for the Iran hostage crisis, and that was just it, and he didn't do anything else wrong as president. Trump. Wait, what? You're going to have to explain that one to me. I don't understand what you mean there. Carter was not as unpopular in the 70s as Trump is now. I would say he definitely dropped the ball with the Iran hostage crisis, but a lot of that was, at least towards the end, Iran wanted Reagan to be elected because the day he's going to get sworn in, Carter's on the phone in the Oval securing the release of the hostages. So there was certainly that. And then even when he did try to free them, it just did not go well. But then even then, Iran didn't release all of them. They still kept holding people during the Reagan administration. They were, extorting him for weapons and money. So there's that going on too. I like Carter. He was a good president. I think Carter was a good president. People always want to say, oh, he gave away the Panama Canal. The only way to keep it was to literally fight another Vietnam to keep it. And the American people did not want that. They just didn't. Jimmy Carter became very unpopular when he kicked all the Iranians out of the country. I don't know about that. Carter was unpopular because he was not a good politician. You know, Nixon had a good quote, and I don't remember if it was about Carter, but it's applicable. He said, "You cannot govern the world for how it should be. You have to govern the world for how it is." And I think Jimmy Carter tried to govern the world for how it should be instead of how it is. So there's that. Now, I do think backing the Shah maybe not the best decision. But in terms of the Middle East, getting pretty much every country besides Palestine to stop bombing Israel forever was kind of a big deal, and got Israel to release a lot of land that they had captured over the past 30 years to that point in Egypt, and I think Lebanon too, and giving it back to those what was it, the Camp David Accords? Those were a big deal. What's crazy is to look back and realize that Jimmy Carter had a supermajority in the Senate and got very little done. Well, actually, he was actually a pretty legislatively successful president. He just didn't get a lot of big, impactful stuff done. But then again, he didn't necessarily want to. Have you seen videos of people wanting to come in this country, blaming people like you for not being educated on your party's policies the last 30 years and turning on your own policy? I don't really get what you mean there. Because over the last 30 years, it's been a pretty even split of Republicans and Democrats. I'm not suggesting the Democratic Party is infallible. I'm certainly not. Carter's like Buchanan. No. I mean, Buchanan, it's apples and oranges to compare a 19th century president to a 20th century president. But yeah, I mean, obviously, if they were president at a more boring point in history, they probably would be remembered better. I would not say Carter was ineffective and feckless the same way that that Buchanan was. You are causing the world to hate you, man. You mean me or the Democrats? Because I frankly don't give a shit if people don't like me. And I can promise you right now, the world hates the United States right now, and it's not because of Democrats. You'll find some, presidents in small countries in Africa that are not down with the trans shit, but England's mad at us, Canada's mad at us, Australia's mad at us. Pretty much every country, every developed country is mad at us. If you look at the list of countries that have signed on to Trump's attempted replacement of the UN, it's literally just Russia and a bunch of like Eastern European nations that are just former Soviet states. We're literally the laughingstock of the world. Now, I have friends in England, Canada, Ireland, everywhere, and they're like, seriously, what the fuck are you people doing? And you don't have to like my opinions, and that's perfectly fine. And I'm willing to be proved wrong. It's kind of the point of this channel. It's kind of part of the logo that says never stop learning. That's kind of the point of it. That includes me. No, we are not, pal. Not if you're rich. Again, what does that mean? We are the laughing stock of the world right now. If you're a rich person in this country, you're just buying Trump's favor. That's all you're doing. You just give him something shiny and give him some plaque that says, yes, you have a big penis, and he'll leave you alone. And if you don't toe the line, like a lot of these people used to not do, like Elon and Zuckerberg and Bezos, that when Trump wasn't in power were very vocally against him, they're just trying to curry favor with him. You know, like Apple, they gave him so-and-so amount of money for, I don't know, his library, and he exempted them from the tariffs. That's just open corruption. Just out and out open corruption. He's selling pardons to the highest bidder. You know, he can't sit there and say that the Venezuela shit was about drugs when he goes and pardons the convicted president of Honduras that was trafficking drugs. It's just a bait and switch. That's been the Republican Party platform for the last 40 years. Just bait and switch. Blame it on someone else and then go and do it. Break the government so you can then say it doesn't work and then privatize it. The same old playbook. And most people in this country and most people in the world are not rich. So there's that too. Everyone wants to be rich, certainly. I would say if you're rich, you'd probably rather be like in Sweden. There's nothing to do with money anymore. Did you see the silver crash today? The crypto market too? You know, Iran took hard drives. Moscow last night gave them Bitcoin. They sold it. Yeah, that's all true. And everyone's saying that because gold's doing very well right now, because gold's a kind of a hedge against hyperinflation, that's an indicator that we're about to have a recession, which we probably are. And Iran has to do that because their currency is literally valueless right now. If you can find some Iranian money on the foreign exchange market, gobble that shit up. I think you could get like $1 million, Iranian dollars for every American dollar. The problem is you just aren't able to find it right now. But the second that stuff ticks up a nickel in value, you'd be a rich man. I assume you know it from reading the fucking Wall Street Journal or something. Same way everyone else knows these things. What president would you replace Jackson with on the $20 bill? I would say Garfield, TR, FDR, Polk, or Grant. Well, Grant's already on the 50, so there'd be no reason to put him on the 20. And you don't necessarily have to put a president on it. I mean, we've got Franklin on the 100. We got Hamilton on the 10. I mean, he was the Treasury Secretary. That makes sense. I would replace Jackson with... I like Garfield. Wouldn't be Garfield. Teddy... I wouldn't be opposed to Teddy or FDR. I'd have to think about that a little bit, though. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a president. I'm only telling you this as an American. It's important to educate out of patriot love and respect, even though you're misinformed as fuck. I mean, I'm an American too, dude. And let me see if I can show you. I mean, this is literally just volumes upon volumes of books here. All here, all here. All there, down there. I will never claim to know everything, but I'm certainly smarter than the average bear. I grew up in a very southern conservative state to apolitical parents. My parents have never voted in an election in their entire lives. Never talked to them about politics. And I was much more conservative when I was younger. No, if you're an illegal immigrant, you should be deported. I've said that many times. This is what the Fed won't take from us fellow Americans. We can argue and debate. but my love for my fellow American will triumph. Any foreign immigrant bullshit, my American love is strong. See, that's that type of rhetoric that's dangerous. That American first nationalism, that shit doesn't work anymore. This is the 21st century. We live in a global economy and a global market. Our people go all over the world. People come here. That's the reason America has thrived, is that we have people from all over the world, the smartest people from everywhere. They can come here. I'm an independent. I know Democratic policy falters hard to immigrant policy. Now, I won't disagree there. I mean, immigration was a big factor in Harris losing in 24. Biden kept saying, I don't have the authority to do this, but it turns out he did. And when you... It really would have just been easier if he had just done nothing. Because issuing the executive order after saying you can't just makes you look stupid. Even though it worked, it still makes you look bad because you said you couldn't do it. In terms of being an independent, I mean, there's been a singular independent president in this country's history, and that was George Washington. We've had one guy get close to doing it, and that was Ross Perot, and he actually probably could have won in 92 if things had gone a little bit differently. But Jesse Ventura is really the only major third-party candidate that we've ever actually had to do anything. I think when he was governor, I think the governor of Maine was also an independent. But when you say independent, I mean, people often conflate that to meaning, you know, are you a libertarian? Are you a Green Party? Are you a Peace Party? Are you a Tea Party? There's always another party. And then you run the risk of, instead of a party with like 30 to 40% popular approval ruling like we have now, you run the risk of being like England, where you have a party ruling of 20 to 30% because they have a plurality. I'm not saying I'm opposed, but ranked choice voting and primaries really kind of eliminate the two-party dichotomy argument. So why do you feel that what Trump is doing to deport them is wrong? Because ICE is going around abusing people. I mean, it's very obvious. They're poorly trained. I mean, again, the stuff didn't happen under Obama. And again, yes, they should be participating, but it's all just vindictiveness and it's for show. There's a reason he's only sending them into blue areas. It's not just because that's where the immigrants are hiding. It's not. If you don't think there was a bunch of illegal immigrants in Texas and New Mexico, I've gotten some beachfront property in Utah to sell you. Google the Cloward Piven tragedy 3 years after JFK's death. Cloward Piven strategy. Okay, I will do that. I always like to learn new stuff. Let's see what we can find about that, actually. Why not? Let's see. Cloward Piven strategy. Okay, so people proposing a strategy and it being implemented en masse by the government are two different things. Now, just by reading this here, I would say, yeah, this is not good. But you can't end poverty by overloading the welfare system, because, I mean, the Great Society programs didn't end poverty. So I would say this is sort of a apples and oranges situation. Because if the government en masse had implemented this, because here's the thing, LBJ was, other than Carter, was the last Democrat president from 1968 until Clinton gets elected. So if you have any problem with the U.S. system up until from over those next 25 years, you gotta blame the Republicans because they were in charge most of the time. Besides Jimmy Carter, who would you say had the best post-presidency? This means what you meant by post-presidency, because Quincy Adams just ended up going to Congress and then he ended up dying there. Carter obviously did the most good. I I mean, let's just look back. I mean, Biden's going to spend the rest of his post-presidency just descending into madness because he's losing his mind. Obama's finally opening his library and his foundation, whatever the hell it's doing, which I think it's a community organization. George W. Bush has been doing a lot of causes for veterans, which is good. Clinton, a lot of work along with H.W. Bush's foundation, particularly around Katrina and stuff. Reagan spent basically all his years after 92 in hiding, dying of Alzheimer's. I wouldn't say Teddy Roosevelt because he spent his years not being president trying to get the presidency back and giving us Woodrow Wilson. So no, I wouldn't. And then he ended up dying very young. That's a toughie. I really don't have a good answer to that one. Allow it to allow their own. Both parties are at fault. Now, I'm not going to suggest that both parties have not had a hand in what's going on. I mean, the left is always talking about universal health care, but there's a solid dozen, Democratic senators, if not more, that would vote against it. Neither party is going to legalize marijuana anytime soon. So, there's certainly, I'm not saying that there isn't corruption on either side. Both parties have special interests. Both take PAC money for the most part. But what I always tell people is it's an elephant and a mouse. You can't look at them and not understand that one is bigger than the other. There's a difference between, not voting for universal health care and voting against gun control. Both are bad for people, but one's getting children shot, one's keeping them from paying less money for health insurance. Our financial system cannot do it. Again, I don't know what you mean. What do you mean by that? What did Biden do? What do you mean? Because Biden did not implement any mass welfare programs, I can assure you that. He implemented like a cheap internet policy as a part of the infrastructure bill so people in rural areas could get internet, but it expired after 2 years. My first video on this channel was an hour and a half long documentary on everything that Biden did in his term. I would suggest you go back and look at it. Now, obviously, we only have so many dollars to spend, but most of our spending is Social Security and the military. So one, you've got to raise the retirement age because people are just living longer. We have like 2 workers for every retiree now. Back when Social Security started, it was like 30 or 40. So as unpopular as it's going to be, and neither party wants to be the one to do this, you got to raise the retirement age. 65 is just too young, and you can actually start drawing at 62. States receive federal funding, and the states implemented the funding to benefit non-resident programs. That's what Minnesota has shown us. I mean, there's certainly some truth to that, but that's the state's right to do that. The Constitution is very clear that if the Constitution does not prohibit you from doing it, you can do it. So if you have a problem with it and you live in one of those states, then you just vote for different people or you move to a different state. People are leaving California to go to Florida and Texas because they like the way those states operate. Again, I'm not in favor of tax money being wasted for any purpose, but for the people that want to nickel and dime and saying, well, we're spending millions of dollars here doing this, that, and the other, and then they don't bat an eye when Trump tries to give more money to ICE than we give to the Marine Corps. Or he openly admits that the F-35s don't work, and then he orders, 50 of them to the tune of $10 billion. The only actual fiscal conservative, in Congress is Rand Paul. Grant, because he wrote his memoirs dying of throat cancer and finished them published just days before he died. I wouldn't say that's the best post-presidency. I mean, he spent his post-pres... I mean, actually, up until that point, yeah, because he ended up touring the world, almost got the presidency back, and was rich for most of it. But I would say the last year of his life was pretty bad. He was dying of throat cancer, and he was broke. And if not for Mark Twain, his book wouldn't have even have helped his family in the way that it ended up helping. So I would say up until that point, yeah, Grant had a pretty good post-presidency. Dude went on a on a global tour, after he was president, just being received by every foreign dignitary and monarch that would have him. Turnow's book on Grant is so good. Everyone read that book. So good. I do appreciate all the thoughtful discussions. And I appreciate everyone keeping it polite for the most part. I don't mind profanity, but we can be adults, so I do appreciate all the lively discussion. But the idea that socialism is going to destroy America is, people have been saying that for 80 years. It has not happened, and it's not going to happen. Because the difference between us and a place like Venezuela is they give shit away without taking in any revenue. Our problem is we don't do it at to the detriment of the American people, and because we want to give Boeing and Lockheed and what five contractors it is for the military all this money. Here's $500 for a bag of bolts. People that don't want to get hurt or killed stay out of police way. ICE is police, You forget, ICE is not police. It is not. You are very wrong there, Mr. Nat Turner. ICE is immigration enforcement. They are not law enforcement. They do not have the ability to arrest you or detain you. ICE cannot, pull you over for a traffic violation. If they pull you over, they have to have reasonable suspicion that you or someone in the vehicle is an illegal immigrant. ICE is not doing that. People standing on top of a roof shooting pepper balls at protesters or shoving people with a phone or threatening to kill them is not law enforcement. It's bullying and it's domestic terrorism. Are people out there trying to provoke a reaction out of ICE? Yes. And those people are being stupid. Personally, I'm not going to go to an ICE protest because I don't want to get tear gassed. I'm just going to vote. But you have the constitutional right to be on public property and to yell at someone. If you want to tell them to fuck off and record them, that is absolutely your constitutional right. And they do not have the right to put their hands on you for you doing that. And if you are impeding law enforcement, then the answer is then you get arrested, you get a trial, and they determine whether you're guilty or not. Not you get shot in the driver's seat of your car. That is the difference. It should not be you comply or you die. That's fascism. We're not Italy. Trump's not, may not want, kind of like Mussolini. But ICE getting a memo that you don't have to get a warrant to go in someone's house is blatantly unconstitutional. I've got the thing on the wall right here. I don't carry around a little cellophane constitution in my pocket that I've never read. I've read the Constitution. I will never vote again, man. I didn't know Trump was involved with Epstein. I'm certainly glad to hear that principle would prevent you from voting for Trump. I wouldn't say don't ever vote again. One of the reasons the U.S. is in the shit shape that it's in is because people don't vote. I mean, if you go back to election turnout, like in the early 1800s, even up until around the Civil War, we had solid 80 to 90% voter turnout. Now, granted, far fewer people were eligible to vote then. But even in 2020, we had pretty high turnout, and that was still 65%. I mean, we literally just have tens of millions of people in this country that could vote, that don't, and if they do, it would drastically affect the outcome. Now, as an independent voter, I would say there's two schools of thought. There's the one that people would suggest that your vote is a wasted vote because you're not voting for one of the winners, or the Jesse Ventura approach, which is vote your conscience, which ultimately, as long as you're satisfied with the vote you cast, that's the important part. Your guy may not win, but if you can sleep at night knowing that I cast my vote and I did my duty as a citizen, that's the important part. Everyone knows you can't drive towards law enforcement while being detained. Well, that's not what she did. Just not. Watch the video that the cop that shot her, not the cop, the ICE agent that shot her was shooting. She cuts the wheel to the right. He runs in front of the vehicle. And the problem is you had 6 agents around that car. Some of them were saying, get out of the car. Some of them were saying, get out of the way. But it's also, The Supreme Court, this current Supreme Court, has ruled that that you cannot use lethal force against a vehicle that is trying to escape, even if that's what she was doing. Supreme Court has ruled that. So there's no justification for any of that. If she had wanted to run him over, she would have just ran him over. What is your 3 favorite movies of all time or series about a president? Mine will be Death by Lightning, The Conspirators, or Warm Springs. Death by Lightning is very good. In terms of TV shows, Death by Lightning, The Kennedys, and the History Channel 3-part series on Grant. There's also a great show on John Adams. In terms of movies, I would say All the Way. That's with Bryan Cranston playing LBJ. Lincoln with Daniel Day-Lewis. And The Conspirators is good, but that's less about Lincoln than more about the assassination. Another good presidential movie. The Apprentice doesn't really focus on Trump as president. Vice was pretty good. It doesn't have a lot of George W., but I mean, focuses on Dick Cheney as vice president. Saying these people weren't interfering, they would be alive. Yes and no. I mean, in the sense that if they weren't there, sure, but you should be able to protest without dying. Alex Peretti was helping a lady who had been shoved stand up. I mean, that's just a fact of life. The Don't Tread on Me crowd has quickly become the Tread on Me Daddy crowd. Can we have a phone chat, bro? No, I'm not giving up my phone number to anybody. There's a reason I don't even say my name on this channel. Because people do get crazy. I've got a wife and children. And I would hate to have to shoot someone that showed up at my house. There's a reason I keep a revolver next to my computer. One second again. Children are calling. I'll be right back. Alrighty. Sorry about that, guys. Alright, so the toddler's awake, so I'm going to go ahead and read the final chats and wrap up the stream. If local law enforcement would have disobeyed the governor and allowed the departments to cooperate with ICE like the police union stated, things would be a lot different. And that's probably true. Again, I'm not saying that all the states are following the law properly, but when it starts being an attack on the citizenry by the federal government, I don't blame them for having a response. Governor Walz should have never called for them to stand down. Yes, he should have. Yeah. He should have. Y'all youngsters just don't understand the law. Dude, you don't understand your eyeballs. They were not interfering with law enforcement. We weren't talking about helping a lady again. The police, come on. Dude, watch the video. I mean, it's clear as fucking day. They pushed a lady down. He walked over to pick her up. They pulled him off of her, took his gun away, and then killed him. It's just that simple. If Garfield was never shot, do you think he would have been shot at 2 full terms? Maybe. Only because he would have been like Arthur and gone against the spoil system, and Arthur didn't get reelected. So there weren't a lot of 2-term presidents at that point in time, but I think he would have had a shot for sure. Do you help your mom if she's being arrested? Well, my mom's dead, but it would depend. If my mom, I've watched my dad be arrested many times for beating my mom. So yeah, if you commit a crime, you go to jail. It's that simple. Now, if the police were abusing my mom, then that would be a different answer. But that lady that they shoved, they were not arresting her. They were abusing her. And he was standing up for that lady. And it cost him his life. But I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up, everybody. It's been a very lively stream, very lively discussion. I certainly appreciate it. I hope everyone continues to come back for future streams. We do these every Saturday night, you know, barring anything crazy from happening. But I'm trying to remember, I had a topic for next week picked out. It'll come to me though. I'll put it in the post section. So he died for nothing. I disagree, because now that after his death, Trump has started pulling ICE out. So I would say, if anything, his death accomplished what he could not accomplish in life. You know, what does Rambo say? Live for nothing or die for something. Not the way I would have went out, you know, but it's your life. You have the right to do what you want with it, I suppose. But thanks for stopping in, everyone. I'll see you next weekend. And until next time, never stop learning.